don't take action. Some were arrested. And so police saying, no, look, we don't want to. And so this probably being one of the messages, to try and encourage them to, we're with you. We have your back. Go ahead. But, I think the reality is we have to let the institutions work as much as possible. Let these independent institutions do their job. And it is a better deal for everyone. It's a better deal for everyone, so that we don't really take the flak for everything that happens.
Yeah. Okay, so void of emotion and void of any kind of pontification. We're already at 5 now, and it would appear as though, just from what we're able to see on the ground, and based on the things that the president actually did say in this interview, out of the 5, we're 0 for 5. It doesn't look really good at this point. But let's look at something else that he said, which I think is of vital importance. When you talk about foreign policy, when you talk about policy of government, not just foreign, but then inclusive of that foreign policy, very important how you operate within the regions in which you are geographically domiciled. The issues of the RSF come in very clearly here, and whether the Ruto administration is courting parallel governments or courting insurrections in other countries, whereby Kenya has stood as one who would actually fight for peace under the likes of Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka in the Sudan Peace Accord, and in the settlements for peace that came about in Somalia under folks like General Sumbewo, under folks like Bethuel Kiplagat, whereby there was this fighting for that peace. And then you see whereby it would appear as though the present administration is courting what would be rebel groups. So one would ask then, what is the position when it comes to Kenya? President Ruto was very clear that they did not have conversations with anybody from the RSF. In fact, what he said during this interview is that he met with people from civil societies of south of Sudan. They met with women groups. But there's a video here of him shaking hands with the RSF leader Hemeti in Nairobi. There's another video of Kenyan officials, including the deputy president, receiving Hemeti at JKIA. There is yet another video of the Sudan RSF leader Hemeti, yet again, signing the alternative government deal in Kenya. And then, unfortunately, there's another video of Ruto saying that the people who came to Kenya were a Sudanese civil group. This is where I'm confused, because I have to ask the what would be seemingly naive question that why would you say this, that you are not having these conversations with an individual who is widely seen as one that you don't want to dabble with, especially when there is a institutionally established government in Sudan, right? And this is a rebel group who's come to set up a parallel government. You give audience in Kenya, you're essentially saying that you side with them. You've given them the space, so you're okay with their activities. This is in the public eye. Your deputy shook hands. They signed a deal in Nairobi. Why would you say that that did not occur, and that the folks who came in were women's groups and civil groups from Sudan? Why?
I think first, President William Ruto should never have given that interview. They say that people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. This is a typical example of an individual in a glass house going out there to throw stones. He shouldn't have given that interview. But his eagerness for publicity was such that when he hears that this particular global network would like to interview you, he is excited, and so he goes to the set. And I doubt that he even gives his communications team the opportunity to prepare him for the interview. Because if we are the communications team and we are preparing you for the interview, we would invite ourselves and you also to think about the very worst questions
that would be asked.
that would be asked, and we think about the most satisfactory answers that we are going to give. And if we find that we are in a dead end, we tell you, Your Excellency, skip that for today. You are very busy. You have other things to deal with, because this is in a the public domain. Everyone knows that Hemeti came here. He was received by Rigathi Gachagua, and Rigathi Gachagua has spoken about it quite convincingly. He took him to State House, and we could see that the red carpet was rolled out. You don't just roll out the red carpet for anyone. And we have had all manner of narratives around that. Maybe some of them stretched out a little bit, but there's cause to believe that when you look at the entire East African community region today, it looks like one hugely expanded crime scene, and the crime is being committed at the very top. There is an alliance of leaders in the region who are committed to things extra legal, and definitely Kenya is mired into the whole thing. It does appear to me that we have got a lot of work defined for us as citizens of East Africa, regardless that you speak of Tanzania, you speak of DRC, Uganda, South Sudan, Kenya, Somalia. We have our work cut out for us in this expanded crime scene.
Bilo, I want to look at the Kenya's diplomatic policy as it stands at the moment. So we look at what is happening in the Sudan and Kenya's involvement in the war in the Sudan, because we also have seen Kenyan weapons in the Sudan. And one would ask the question, why would weapon from Kenya find itself in the Sudan? How did it leave the country in the first place? We look at the situation in the DR Congo. I remember President Felix Tshisekedi at a point saying does not want Kenya to midwife the situation. Why is DR Congo on the edge when it comes to Kenya midwifing the peace process in the country? You look at Kenya, Tanzania. Boniface Mwangi is picked up in Tanzania. He is tortured, is abducted, brought back to the country. And you hear leadership in government say, Kenyans need to respect other people's constitution and rule of law, despite the fact that a citizen of the republic, whether in the country or outside the country, ought to be protected by the leadership and a regime that is there. But you look at the diplomatic circle in the country, the foreign ministry seems as though saying it is okay for what happened for Boniface Mwangi in Tanzania. You look at the situation in Kenya, Uganda. Kizza Besigye picked up in Kenya, taken back to Uganda. Today is going through treasonous charges in the country. But that notwithstanding, Nicholas Oyo Bob Njagi picked up in Uganda, locked up for over 38 days in a cell in Uganda. Ugandan authorities say, we do not have him. Only for the president later to admit that these men were picked up and locked up in a refrigerator. Again, foreign ministry in the country, quiet. What are we doing with our foreign and diplomatic policy of the country? Do we care of our image out there? Or is it that we have politicized everything so much that we do not care about our diplomatic policies?
Very well. A number of issues. One, I think the country has always had a policy of non-interference with the countries, other countries, particularly our neighbors. We've always had that policy since independence. So it's surprising that today the government really is coming out to welcome people like the RSF, that the government should actually have nothing to do with. Absolutely, and particularly because of what they're doing. With the entire world is they're committing genocide and so forth in Sudan. The government should have nothing to do with such groups, and it was wrong, I think, and it's wrong, and I think it shouldn't. It's a pity that the president still says there's nothing wrong with RSF. The two generals are the same. They cannot be the same. We cannot say they're the same. I think the point is, as a country, we should always stand on that policy of non-interference with what's going on in trying to change the situation in those countries. And the same thing. That's why in Congo had the same issue. They were concerned that Kenyans were getting involved, and so forth. So there is, but me, I we all read about these things. Clearly, the government of Kenya in these regional issues is acting on behalf of other parties. That's the unfortunate thing. The moment you start playing, acting for others, then you lose your independence completely, and you lose all your mind, and the things you do, you don't even see there. So we are becoming agents of other state actors, other countries, and this is why you see government trying to getting involved in all these activities in all of the regional countries. On these other issues of the Kenyans, there seems to have been, because I dealt with this matter during the time of Kibaki, and even during the time of Muluka will say that was because it was about terrorism. But the reality is, under Kibaki, so many Kenyans were arrested. Here, picked at night, kidnapped, and taken to Uganda. You remember? And I remember the Minister for Justice, Mutula Kilonzo, issuing statements, because there was a court ruling here that those people have been illegally taken out of Kenya. Can they be brought back? And nothing. And the minister himself issuing, statements, and nothing happened. And the government, those guys got convicted and arrested and charged there. They finished the prison sentences and came back after so many. The same thing, another group that was, picked from here and taken to Ethiopia, suspected involved in terrorism. So the government of Kenya has always played dumb when there are other interests involved. And even in that one, because US and other parties were involved, in this war on terror was involved, and so nobody wants to raise finger. So I think to some extent, when there is a party or the other that is involved, then the government would play for the government to take an action. Whether it's Muluka who's arrested in Kampala or Tanzania, it really doesn't matter if there's some other bigger issues they're trying to protect. But in the recent ones, I think the ones of Kinanjagi and all these things, this one clearly is politics.
Okay.
I mean, if you're my opponent and you're making my life difficult here and you got arrested there, the better they'll celebrate. Let him be held there for a few, as Museveni says, in the fridge for a few more weeks. That was just, I think that was politics.
It's interesting because the president did have a few things to say about what happened in Tanzania during the just concluded election, which saw, according to what they said, Samia Suluhu Hassan, re-elected as president. We'll listen in to what he had to say about that.
Tanzania. It is.
It seems a bit fishy. 97%, doesn't it?
Well, in a democracy, for example, in Kenya, you can never get 96%.
So it's not a democracy anymore, then.
That is you saying. Every country have a way of them doing their stuff, but I think the primary thing is democracy is the best governance system. It is not tidy always. It is not always easy, because there are all manner of moving parts. But I think we must work together to ensure that we protect democracy.
What would the protection of democracy look like? Barak, your brow is furrowed as though you're not quite sure what the president may have been saying in that last bit there. But what would progressive democracy then look like? 97% doesn't seem to be it. We've heard the likes of Barack Obama even, weigh in on this as well. But President Ruto seems to think that that's just all right.
It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. And in fact, I think Suluhu should just have given herself 100%, because I miss as good as a mile. And it is very clear that we have seen reports that indicate that the election was flawed through and through. An indictment against regional leadership. President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda sending a congratulatory message to Samia Suluhu and telling her that your victory is an indication of the confidence that the people of Tanzania have in you and in your leadership, in spite of the fact that we are seeing them in the hundreds of thousands in the streets. Reports even by recanting African Union eventually admitting that this fell way below the expected standards, and SADC also saying the same. I think SADC went out very clearly from the outset. ESC was ish, as my children would say. And therefore, an indictment against the leadership of not just Tanzania, but East Africa and eventually Africa, and as is at the very end of it, agglutinated within the African Union. The AU does not work, as it says, with regimes that access power unconstitutionally. And Samia Suluhu has come back unconstitutionally because she was not properly elected by the people of Tanzania. And we need certain basic standards as leaders if we are talking about protecting democracy. Those who exercise sovereign power at the very top do so in trust to the rest of humankind. And when situations in their countries escalate to the point of collapsing, then the impact is felt in the entire region and sometimes even globally. We saw that within the space of 4 days, there was an outcry in the outlying regions around the borders with Tanzania that trade, business, commerce was collapsing. And you get to a point where even the isolation senator, where we say these are now our internal affairs that others should not comment, the argument starts killing itself. In the end, we are all involved. And as regional leaders, if this was happening in the European Union, for example, the EU would take a stand and it would say, no, we don't recognize this government and we must get into that space. If the African Union suspends Mali, Niger, South Sudan, and Burkina Faso, because they're saying that the person in power has not got there constitutionally, do constitutions say that you will seize power using guns, killing thousands of people because you were previously properly elected, so you must hold on to power? Indeed, the AU statutes say that if you will refuse to relinquish power after being defeated in a democratic election, you should not be allowed to go on your country, and your government will be suspended. You are not going to attend the meetings of the African Union or to participate in the decisions. And we must get to a point where people like the presidents of East Africa speak plainly about these things that are happening. Is President William Ruto preparing Kenyans for a similar happening as that which has happened in Tanzania, for him to say it's not for anybody else to speak about that? These are the questions we must ask. Is President Yoweri Museveni preparing Uganda and East Africa for their own version of what has happened in Tanzania.
And I think my question, my question, Bill, before you just chime in, would be as we talk about the regional leaders, President William Ruto as well sent his congratulatory message. We saw Deputy President Kithure Kindiki present at the swearing-in ceremony, and you look at the East Africa region, President William Ruto being the chairperson of the region, and seemingly has been really quiet. What do we read from that?
President who?
Ruto being the chairperson of the EAC. The EAC is quiet.
Very well. This is a matter I want to take a few minutes on, because on some things I agree with Barack, on others I may not agree with him. It's a fact that in many of the African countries, the level of democracy, really, when you come to the election, it's really wanting. It's not something to write home about. And it's a large number of countries. I think only a handful of countries in Africa have elections similar to the ones Kenya has. Even in this region, I think there are very few. I mean, if you look at in Rwanda, the president always gets 99%. It's not been a big deal. Uganda has never allowed Besigye to run fairly. Never mind whatever percentage. It's always been the same. You go to Djibouti, you go to Ethiopia, all the time when Zimbabwe and everybody. So it seems to be across the board that there are very few countries, indeed, not more than a handful in Africa, where people go into real competitive elections like the ones that. So to the extent that I think Ruto says it won't happen in Kenya. I mean, we don't get 96%. This is a fact. I mean, he knows it's a fact that you can't get into that kind of situation in Kenya. But there was a time when I was in the African Parliament in South Africa, and I went for as observers to a number of elections in Kenya, Angola, in Africa, Angola, Nigeria, and several. I'm telling you, there are no elections in many of these countries. Absolutely. I mean, Tanzania would become a democracy if you see what happens in many of those other African countries. The elections are conducted by a ministry, and the turnout is 10%. And the Ministry of Interior, which conducts the election, will do whatever they want. And African Union will still
observe,
and the elections will be concluded, and the country goes on. And let me tell you this, there are many factors, I think I've mentioned this earlier, that determine how things go forward. A lot depends on some actors outside, countries in the West particularly, who determine what happens. If they're happy with X as being the president, it doesn't matter how that person got into power. And those regional countries can't say much. And that person will get endorsed, and that election will go on, and nothing will happen. If they don't like you, even if you won the election, in a fair election like ours, you will still get in trouble. They'll still say
in a fair election like Kenya's?
Even if it happened, and they are not amused, you will get a lot of flack from media, international and everything, because you are not in good books or politically correct with some. But I think it is. There's no doubt that we need to have freedoms in the way we conduct our business. Without freedoms, there'll be no proper. There'll be no, even the security and stability and all these things are now dependent on how the country governs itself. But to expect that a country like Kenya a president would go out and criticize the way the former Botswana president talked about Tanzania or Uganda or Rwanda, I don't think that will happen anytime soon. They won't. Because
why?
For the simple reasons that if they do, the same will be done tomorrow to you.
And that's what I mean when I say that they are probably preparing.
No, even if it's not prepared, but nobody would want to throw stones. You say it when you are living in a glass house. Let me finish, Barack. When you are living in a glass house means even your election, even in ours where the competitiveness is always 51. In 2007, we said it was stolen. In 2013, we said it was stolen. In 2017, it was actually declared by the Supreme Court. Uhuru came in with 98. The other party did not participate. So, I mean, if you start looking at criticizing the others, then you also start getting in trouble with yours.
Well, couldn't one argue even
I think that is the argument why
I think we are saying the same thing, Senator, ladies and gentlemen. The percentages are neither here nor there. I operate in the qualitative space rather than yourself, Senator, who operates in the quantitative space. I look at the quality of the elections, and it is the same. I think we shouldn't flatter ourselves by any degree of imagination that we are better because the level of theft in our environment is lower, that someone gets 50-something, while in another country they get 90-something. We are running a race of tortoises. And if you win a race of tortoises, you are still a tortoise. We must get out of that tortoise league. We must raise our bar of expectations and our bar of achievements. The continent of Africa, when we look at the African Union from the early 60s to where we are, self-determination has been very high on the cards, and we must continue to talk about self-determination. It was one of the reasons why the union came into existence, and there can be no self-determination without the consent of the governed. So if we look at a country that has got a Ministry of Interior sitting down and choreographing and coming up with what it's calling the elections, and is saying that this is the one who has been elected, Africa must increasingly resist. It must increasingly be able to say no if we are going to get away from this unending delirium of flawed elections and violence. We must understand that if we are talking about becoming a first world country, becoming a first world continent, we have got to raise our bar of standards and expectations. And it begins with government. When government is stolen, because you are stealing elections, when you do what we are doing in Kenya, you are stealing government. When you have stolen government, then you are ready to steal everything else that goes with government, with being in government. It's an opportunity to steal. You are basically a gangster. And that kind of gangster must surround himself or herself with other gangsters and allow them the latitude to loot. And when they have been allowed the latitude to loot, Mheshimiwa Senator, coming a bit into your quantitative space, then you capture public finance, you capture public procurement, you capture public audit, you capture the legislature, you capture the security apparatus, and so you are on a free roll of misrule.
Let me I want to separate the issue of being a first world or developed from the democracy, because you can actually be developed without having any democracy. And we've seen it in the Gulf countries, all those monarchies that are on the first lane. You have seen China with its communists, whatever, it's on the first lane. So it's and other countries we have seen in the past, Singapore and others that have developed in the same way. But the issue of democracy for countries like ours is really important. One of the things which I agree with what the President said is that Kenya is the center of everything in the region. Why? I think it's largely because of the democracy. And democracy is not, Barack, only about our elections and whatever.
Yes,
it's even the legal infrastructure, the governance and the law and order. You know, if somebody throws you a bottle of water, you can go to a court and and get some rights and so forth. And
right.
It's not something you can take for granted in many other countries. I set up business in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda. There was a time when I was active, and even all the way to DRC. You can't compare that environment if you got used to the Kenyan environment in terms of the many other factors you look at, collectively, in terms of the freedoms and in terms of the laws and in terms of the the robustness of our systems and so forth. So there are many factors that you look at, but I agree that in matters of elections that we are doing in this part of the world, that they're getting a bit more murky and murky. I mean, it's not getting better.
So would you not agree that that then would be a sign of the direction in which you're going to. If you are unable to have the process through which a leader is selected, at the very least to be seen to be, not even, to be seen to be fair and clear, I'm not even going to say free, clear in terms of who the leader was and how he or she was selected. If you can't do that, and look across the board, look across the continent, it has a direct bearing of all of these things that we've talked about that the president then would have alluded to. It has a bearing then on how you're going to be able to sort out your education. It has a bearing on how you sort out your healthcare and your economy. If it can't be clear how you chose the person who's going to lead on all these fronts, how possibly then will you be able to do all of these other things if the platform or the process through which you were selected is not clear? Can we then expect you to do all of these things that we're talking about?
Getting murkier and more difficult is because leadership in many of our countries, this included, is all about resources. You are getting to lead and not to provide service and not to change the lives of the ordinary folks, but it's also an opportunity. It's about the opportunity for you to make resources, whether it's from the MP all the way up to the president. And this is why it's life and death. This is why you find that then when you are challenged, your election is being challenged, even by the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court, still people are not accepting the, so we don't know what happened to the Supreme Court when they nullify the election. But the reality is ours has become about resources. So we are continuously, that's why our election, the moment it ends, the next campaign starts. It's about power. It's about getting into that position. Because when you are in power, when you are in government, you are everything. You have everything. That is why then we are all the time. So in that situation, then you get into a situation where the persons want to undermine the process, whether it's through the IBC, whether it's through the... so the level of thefts, I have got into politics. If you look at the way the elections were done, say 20 years ago in Ikolomani or in Mandera Central, and the way it is done today, you cannot compare. Today, the level of the attempt to try and steal, to try and rig, to try and cheat is much more high than it was because of that competitiveness. Everybody wants to get into that place because if you get into that seat of a governor or MP or a president or whatever, you are going to get all of resources. You become... So that the level of... That's what I'm saying, it's going to get murkier and murkier. And so... not because of a design by, say, William Ruto or some, but I think it's because of the way that whole architecture of leadership has agitates towards taking advantage of that office to create wealth for themselves and resources for themselves. And so this is unfortunately where the things are headed. So in every little election, at MCA, at MP, it's always about people are going to rig you out. And they'll be cheating, and they'll be attempting to.
Barak, as we are on that point, there is the aspect of how then Kenyans are critically in changing all this, in terms of asking ourselves the question: who are we electing into these positions, and why are we electing them? Do we understand who they are? Do we know the service that they are going to bring? How critical is it for Kenyans to make the right decision on the people they keep in these positions?
It remains a challenge. I do agree with Senator Bilo Kero that it remains a challenge, that it's getting murkier. And yet this is the moment for us to get even more vigilant, because of the felt impact. You are having a state that becomes unashamedly, increasingly and correspondingly, as it gets murkier, it gets by geometrical proportion also more and more of a rogue state. And there's no pretense. When people arrived in power in 2002, John Mark told us that people said it was their turn
to eat.
And so it becomes very clear that we are here to eat. And if you are disturbing us, you are going to be arrested in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, wherever it is, because you are speaking out against this. An ever-expanding number of people now want to become MCAs, they want to become MPs, they want to become president. I agree, because of the opportunities that they are seeing for self-enrichment. But it's also true that the African revolution that Frantz Fanon was dreaming about, senator in the 1940s and 50s, is now here. That we also have the dividend of a youthful population that has been denied opportunities, because democracy, as we say, is not necessarily about the casting of the vote. It's also about the opportunities that exist in the country and the access to those opportunities. If we are developing an education system that is churning out hundreds of thousands of youth in our countries, in fact millions, when we look at the region collectively every year, and we are proud to say that we have graduated so many, but we do not have the absorptive capacity, we are sitting on a time bomb. And that time bomb is going to get rid of all these kleptocratic regimes wherever they sit, in Nairobi, in Dar es Salaam, in Niamey, in Libreville, wherever they sit. And now these young people are able to organize. You know, there was a time when even in my own country, a gathering of 5-10 people could not happen. But these people are organizing and sitting and holding conversations in cyberspace. That is how come on election day you are able to see them bursting into the streets at the same hour, the same minute, everywhere. Someday they are going to overrun the whole continent. On the same day, at the same hour, what will be happening in Libreville will be happening in Niamey, it will be happening in Pretoria, it will be happening in Nairobi, it will be happening in Mogadishu. And change will come to Africa.
With one
rider. With your rider below.
With one rider, Prof. If you read a research or survey done by the University of Nairobi, I think a few years ago, on the youth.
Yes, I read.
And their propensity or their appetite for corruption. These kids are not born in outer space. They are born in Kenya. They are part of the...
Yes, but the pain they feel is real.
The pain is about making money. Wait.
The pain they feel is real. It's here and now. And they do not have that opportunity to be corrupt, even if they decide to be corrupt.
To answer your question, we always talked on that line. Why don't the youth get into parliament? Women are better. Why don't they get into parliament? They all got in youth. A lot of youth are in parliament. A lot of women got into parliament. But ask Barack why then they change and they conform.
I believe there's a bottle of water everybody drinks when they get into the thing.
With Kool-Aid,
it's not that easy. That
when I look at you, I see hope. You have been through those processes and you have come out unscathed. When I see you, I see hope.
So,
and we have youth whom we can believe in.
Yeah. So let's let me conclude by saying on this African countries thing, one of the challenges you've had for a long time is interference from Western countries on whom they want to be the leader. Unfortunately, that has been a major issue. They determined a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes, and they want Barack, so Barack gets in through whatever crooked. Even in the last election we had, by the way, you had a lot of stories about our servers were being audited from US or from where. Stories are so many. But what I know is before Somalia went down, Siad Barre was a very close guy to the US. And they would not listen, that this guy, people were tired. They want to replace him. They said no. They loved him. Zenawi was the blue-eyed boy of the US. All of them. So that to some extent, those things are now going away. They are so busy with themselves. That's why when Gachagua went to the US and says, guys, let me do something. Come, Nairobi, this guy. But they have no time for you nowadays because they are so busy with their own things. But there is no doubt that we have a big challenge domestically within our own communities, because why is our IEBC or Electoral Commission every other term they have to be replaced, and they always go out in the most dignified manner, white, because of what has happened in the election. So we select through a very whatever process, and they get there, and then you know what happens. We have a challenge, but I agree with you. We should remain optimist and let us continue talking.
But also be involved in the processes.
Yes.
And if you take a poll from that as an example, we started at 8 out of 10. It seems as though the results from that poll that we took this morning are inverted, because 80% of the votes cast today seem to think that they would rate the President Ruto's administration at a 2 or less out of 10.
Wow.
These are Kenyans who are speaking about what they see, and it's not just emotional. Bill O'Carroll and Dr. Barrett Maluka, thank you for joining us this morning to be able to open this up. It's very clear what Kenyans ought to do, or how the rest of the citizens of this continent have to start to think. But beyond the think, the doing is just as important. Thank you for being here with us this morning. It's very interesting that we can be able to look at a plan. ICEA asks you also to remember.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start